U.S. Senator Chris Van Hollen is now calling for a bipartisan probe of Deutsche Bank after the New York Times published a major investigation of the lender's long history with the president earlier this week. For years, Deutsche Bank has been the only large financial firm willing to do business with Donald Trump, whose companies have declared bankruptcy at least 5 times, scared away a lot of creditors. According to the Times, Deutsche Bank just continue to do it, continue to lend him money, more than $2.5 billion over the years, in spite of all the risks they knew he posed because he had not paid back basically anyone who ever lent him money before. The bank knew the president was lying to them about his net worth. He defaulted twice on hundreds of millions of dollars. He even took the bank to court, and yet the money kept flowing right up until he ran for president. New York's Attorney General is already investigating several Trump projects financed by Deutsche Bank. 2 House committees, Financial Services and Intelligence, are jointly probing the bank's relationship with the president. Their main question, whether there's any link between the president's business and some of Deutsche Bank's shadier activities around the world.
Well, the concern about Deutsche Bank is that they have a history of laundering Russian money. They paid hundreds of millions of dollars in fines to the state of New York because they were laundering Russian money. And this apparently was the one bank that was willing to do business with the Trump organization. Now, is that a coincidence? If this is a form of compromise, it needs to be exposed.
For more on Deutsche Bank and the president, I'm joined by a freshman Democrat who's already making a splash on the House Financial Services Committee, Congresswoman Katie Porter of California. Congresswoman, good to have you. What are your concerns as someone who has spent your career thinking about the financial system and banks, your concerns about Deutsche Bank?
I think what's going on with Deutsche Bank is we have a repeat offender. This is a bank that has violated laws over and over again. Even since the financial crisis, they've evaded taxes, they've manipulated interest rates, and they have engaged in money laundering to the tune of $10 billion for Russian oligarchs. So this is a corporate recidivist. This is a bank that has clearly not learned its lessons from the financial crisis, and their willingness to continue to loan money to Mr. Trump, even when he was not creditworthy, should really raise eyebrows. What would be the reason that a bank would continue to do that?
Yeah, that's my question looking at it. I'm sort of 2 minds, right? I mean, having covered finance a fair amount myself as a journalist, there's always someone around willing to take some risk that's lying around that others aren't. And a lot of times those folks get into trouble and they crash and burn. And then there's the sort of darker reason that there's something untoward going on there. But it seems like the first one is a plausible explanation. I mean, Deutsche Bank seems like a fairly risk-seeking operation.
Oh, it definitely is a risk-seeking operation. They have a voracious appetite for risk. This is the only institution that has been fined by the Federal Reserve for violating the Volcker rule. When you look at their track record, they really do stand out in terms of their willingness to make loans, break rules, ignore compliance. This is a bank that has not come to terms and not shown a willingness to comply with the rules that Congress enacted in Dodd-Frank. I think this episode with Mr. Trump tells us as much about Deutsche Bank and about what's going on in Wall Street as it does about Mr. Trump. What we see here is a bank that simply is willing to serve a handful of elites when it's not doing its job, making the Main Street economy go forward. You know,
our eagle-eyed producer pointed out that back in April 2018, that the Times report about Trump attempting to fire Mueller, which Don McGahn, who is then White House counsel, scotched, that the president's anger was fueled by reports the subpoenas were obtaining information about his business dealings with Deutsche Bank. According to interviews with 8 White House officials, his lawyers and advisors worked quickly to learn about the subpoenas and ultimately were told by Mr. Mueller's office reports were not accurate, leading the president to back down. What does that say to you?
I think the president doesn't want this investigation to go forward. He's made clear that he doesn't think that the special counsel will find anything. But the American people deserve to know exactly what the special counsel has found. And given Deutsche Bank's long history of wrongdoing, of cheating consumers, of engaging in shell game trades to launder money for Russian oligarchs, there is a legitimate possible nexus here between foreign interference in the election and Mr. Trump's election and what Deutsche Bank has been doing. So I think this is a very appropriate topic for congressional oversight, and in addition to Special Counsel Mueller's report.
You know, I want to ask you, you're on House Financial Services Committee. You study with Elizabeth Warren at Harvard. You're a law professor who's written textbooks on finance and financial regulation. I used to read you when you were blogging back in the day at TPM Cafe, which is where Elizabeth Warren used to blog as well. You're a real expert in the world of bank regulation that you are now sitting on a committee on. You're now a freshman member of Congress. What has your experience of it been like?
It's been fabulous. I feel like this is an area where I can make a real contribution to the work of the committee and frankly, to the work of both sides of the aisle. Asking the right questions can help us figure out where we need to do more oversight, where there are areas that we can improve. So I do my homework. I really try to dig into the issues, try to make sure that we're getting the answers that we need. And the point of hearings is not for politicians to talk. It's for the American people to get answers.
All right, Congresswoman Katie Porter, freshman out of California. Really great pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.